Hello and welcome to our tutorial on HTML and CSS. Using the latest versions of each at this time would be HTML5, CSS3, and edits will be done with brackets as our main text editor. So the perspective here is from knowing some HTML and wanting to get to know how to work with CSS in our web pages and do some formatting of our otherwise plain coded HTML pages. So with that in mind, first of all, let's take a look at our starting point, and it's going to be an already completed repage HTML based site without any formatting, and then we're going to build the formatting using CSS. So here's our three-page site. There's a home page, a boards page, this is a products page for a skateboard site, and a contact page. Again, home, basically have headings, some links for the navigation, and paragraphs. On the boards page, a little more content there. We have some images for a couple of different skateboards and some information about each. Headings, and then the rest was similar to the other page. And then lastly, contact page. A little bit different because we have some unordered lists. Otherwise, it's paragraphs and headings. So those are a simple three-page site. And then here's what we're going to be hoping to achieve with our CSS. You can see a much more progressive looking site with some nice imagery and a navigation bar with multiple columns here. Same HTML though. Formatted our products a little bit nicer there. The skateboards off to the right. Contact page for bullets now. We have little skateboards in there. Some nice tricks also in the H1. So lots of differences we can see between the starting point and the ending point, and that's all done with CSS and some clever use of backgrounds as well. So we want to see now how to make use of that CSS, how to connect that CSS to our HTML. And to do that, we're going to go to our editor, brackets in this case. Alright, with brackets open, we're going to do File, and we're going to do something called Open Folder, and that's what you normally would do if you have a folder full of pages that you want to work with, and you're not just focused on a single page. So I'm going to open that whole folder, kind of orient brackets towards everything that's inside. And so wherever you might have your video-based files, that's where you'd want to focus your attention here. Mine happen to be on my desktop. I'm going there, the Start folder. Select that folder, and what that does with brackets is it gives you instant access to all the files inside that folder, and with a single click you can immediately have that page or style sheet open to start coding with it right away, and it's a nice interface to go forward with. Now we're going to take a look at the HTML of our beginning pages. So again, I have a home page, index.html, we had a products or boards page, and we had a contact page. So there's the three HTML files. We're also seeing the image files that are in that same folder, mostly used as backgrounds. So let's start with the home page. Typical structure for HTML5, doc type, HTML, head, and body. The head containing a meta tag and a title. You'd be wanting to change anywhere you see Joe Student to your own name if you're following along with the coding here. Now let's take a look at the structure of this document. Now all three pages are going to be very similar in how they are structured. We have in the body header tag, so this is kind of setting off the top area, and H1 inside with the simple text of Complete Skateboards, which is the name of the company. Now below the header we have nav for navigation. Now we saw initially that this nav is played out across the top without any CSS, but when CSS is involved in the final version of this, our navigation bar is going to end up being a vertical left-hand side navigation with the rest of the page content on the right. So we've got some work to do in terms of formatting that nav. Next, below the nav is a section tag, and you'll notice that the section tag has an ID of main. IDs can be used in any HTML tag in the body area to identify it uniquely, And normally that's for styling purposes. So we're going to see how to target a tag that has an ID in your style sheet. So we will expect to see some styling directed toward this main section. Now this section pretty much holds everything main content wise other than the navigation on the page, and below that then all that's left would be the copyright area surrounded by footer tags. So that's the basic structure, and all the content details that go inside the section area for the main content would be headings and paragraphs and possibly lists and so forth, information about the site, the boards and whatnot. So that's pretty much the common structure. Now if you want to start styling, there are a couple of different places where you can put your CSS. So let's take a quick look at that. Let's say, for example, I want to put a background on the page. You can put CSS directly in your HTML tags if you choose to. I don't recommend that approach because you end up naturally with a pretty messy looking HTML code with styles sprinkled around a lot of the tags, and of course that'll have to be done in each page separately, and you get a big mess that's hard to maintain because there's no consistency from page to page to page. But let's see how you could do it. For example, any tag can have a style attribute, and inside the quotes of style you would then be able to use pretty much any CSS property. Let's say background color, for example, and then let's just set color name there, aqua. This would be one way to get a quick style onto your site. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this is going to look like in the browser using brackets live preview. We can see that aqua background here. Now, is that going to be on the other pages? No, because it's just that one body tag that's having that effect. All right, back to our editor. So this is an effective way to get a quick style out to the page, putting that style attribute in a tag. Not recommended though. So what's a better way? Well, there's a slightly better approach, and that would be to use the head area where you can apply a style to an entire page rather than just to a tag. So for example, if I wanted to put a style in here that would affect all headings or all paragraphs or something like that, it could be pretty easily done. Then you're going to have to use style tags. Now this is not a style attribute, but style tags, and then between these style tags you can put your individual CSS properties and target particular tags. Instead of putting your code in a tag, you can use the tag as an indicator. For example, let's just say we want to take all H2s, comma H3s and give them color of red. Okay, now this is going to affect all heading 2s and heading 3s on this page. So you do get a chance to be a little bit more general. You don't have to go into each H2 and H3 to make those changes. So that's definitely a better, more powerful approach and doesn't clutter up your page with as much style code. So this is going to be a little bit of an improvement, and can we see that on the page? Let's see. This is our home page. There you can see the H2s and H3s are getting that red. So this is an alternative approach, a little bit better than what we saw before, but you might guess not ideal. Why? Because this only affects that one page, and if I have a 10-page site, I would have to be copying and pasting a lot of this around to these other pages to get any kind of consistent styling. And again, I'm setting myself up for a maintenance nightmare. If I want a consistent change across all my site pages, it's going to be messy. So this can be effective for a single page, quick style testing, but not great for overall approach. So how do we then approach consistent stylings for a website? Best approach is to have a separate style sheet file, centralized, and have each page reference that style sheet. And to reference it, you would use a link tag in the head, and you link your page to that style sheet, and then the style sheet will contain all the CSS. So if you happen to have the HTML skeleton extension set up in brackets, then it makes it a little bit easier to set up the external style sheet. There you can see the link code, and the only thing that it does not do for you is it doesn't know the name of your style sheet. In fact, it's not yet created, so we don't even know what its name might be, but we can anticipate and come up with something. Maybe we'll call it styles.css. It should be .css if it's a style sheet, so we're going to have to create one using that same name. It's just a text file. We can use brackets to create the CSS file and edit it along with our HTML. So this is a link tag that we want to copy and paste to our other pages in our site. We will then have a central file to control the styles. Okay, so nice setup here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this link tag into my other two pages. So this is my contact page. Paste that in, and again we can use Beautify in order to adjust the indentations and line spacing as needed. And then we have the boards page, and we'll paste that into the boards page as well. Beautify. And now all three pages, index, contact, and boards, all have this new link tag in the head section. Next, we are going to create styles.css and start to add some CSS. We're going to go File, New, creates a new text file. It doesn't know necessarily what kind of file we're creating, but we can tell brackets that we want a CSS file. And when we save it, we'll save it as .css. Let's begin by trying a style. We'll try to put it on the body. So that first thing is called a selector. It tells the browser what part of the page we're trying to format. So for body, we saw earlier that we can set background. And you get some help now that brackets knows what we're coding. CSS, it can come in and help us with background color, for example. And then really didn't love that aqua color for our background, but maybe something a little bit lighter like silver might work for us. So let's go ahead and try that. Now when we save, we're going to want to make sure that it's going into the right folder and that it's going to have the right name. So remember, we need to call it styles.css so that it will be picked up by those link tags that we created in our 3 pages before. So now we come back to one of our pages. Let's not forget that we probably need to save all of our documents. We've got quite a lot of changes we've made, and let's do live preview now. And hopefully we'll see these changes that we've made across our site. So here's boards with the background and contact with the background and our home page. So what we've just noticed is that we now have consistency across our pages style-wise, and at this point we can simply edit styles here in this one style sheet file, and we'll get a consistent result across all pages of our site, which is a much nicer situation for maintaining our site going forward. And with that in mind, now our task is to try to transform our site from this basic vanilla flavored starting point to the much more distinctive looking styled final result with 2 columns and lots of imagery. So let's get started. So first of all, we don't really want silver, but notice that if you mouse over a color, brackets kind of gives you a preview of what it's going to look like. So I'm going to select silver there, and instead I have a color number that we'd like to use, and that is D4, D7, DD, which is a lighter shade of gray and has a little blue in there too. So that's going to be our background color. And I also want to set margins for my page, and so I'm going to hit enter there, and we're going to set a left and right margin. Truth is, some of our browsers and screens these days are pretty wide, and there's not a whole lot of content on these pages, so I'm going to take some of that space away from the browser on the left and right side. We'll do that with a margin left. You can see we're getting some help from brackets here, and we're going to set that to be 20%, and same for margin right, 20%. So what that's going to do for us? Well, we'll take a look at the browser and we'll see that we're getting basically 20% of the screen width out here. That is going to be dedicated to empty space, and it kind of forces the rest of our page content to go in between. We still have some serious issues to deal with, but at least now we're a little bit more compact with our content, and we can work with it more reasonably there. So that takes care of some basic body styling. Normally you'd want to do some body styling to set some defaults. With fonts and other things. For the moment, we're going to move on. The next thing I want to take care of is the header. Now, the header, remember, is the top area, the banner area. And in our final version, that has a big background image. And the background image is bigger than the current space that we have, right? It's just this little header area here. We need more height in order to fit that nice background in there. So one of the settings I need to make for header, which is my selector, is height. So with CSS, I can control the dimensions of things, height and width in particular. And this, I know, I want to be about 175 pixels. So what we're seeing here, by the way, is a little bit of a recipe approach. I've already done some research in terms of what numbers are going to work for us, and we're just kind of plugging them in, getting a feel for how CSS can control these various settings. Certainly some trial and error has already been done for us. So now the background. So now we have a good height of 175 pixels for our particular image. So this is going to be background image property. And then I'm going to use a URL to name that image. Now what brackets does for me is it looks in the current folder and it shows me some files that I could choose, so I don't have to type it in. And in this case, we're looking for BG banner. BG standing for background, so I know this is the background for my banner. So perfect. No typing necessary. No quotes, by the way, when you're using URL and CSS. Let's see what happens if we try to use it. From this point, at least. There it is. A couple problems. One, hard to read the H1 now. Complete Skateboards is barely readable. Also, the image really doesn't fit very nicely into this area, and depending on your screen width, it may or may not fit any better or worse. But we have some work to do to make that look nicer. So one thing is I'm going to use background repeat. There it is. And say none. I do not want any repeating of the background image. And I also want to use background size. So background size is a nice property to use whenever the background image doesn't quite fit what you need. Maybe you want to stretch it, make sure it covers the area. So there's a value called cover there. You can see the 3 values for background size. You can also set specific pixel sizes, but cover is what we want here. And now let's take a look at the result in the browser. Alright, well, I'm not sure you can see very clearly what's going on, but we now have more of the skateboard image displaying here, so we can get a better idea of what that's looking like, regardless of how wide your particular monitor is. So the cover value helps to take care of the problem of this being a different width depending upon your screen size. So a little more flexible for different screens, different devices as well. So let's move on. Next, we clearly need to do some work with the H1 because it's difficult to read against that new background image. And by the way, this is happening on all 3 pages, everything we do here. So let's do H1. This H1 heading definitely needs to be changed so that it doesn't blend into the image but is contrasting much better with it. So first of all, we're going to do that with some color. And the color, we're going to use a color number. So that color number is going to be hashtag, always color numbers have hashtags there, F807-0B. And you can see this a shade of red, and that stands out. You can also see it here in brackets by mousing over the color number. That makes it a little bit more readable. I'm also going to control the font size. We're getting a taste of some of the different things you can do with these different properties. I'm going to set the font size to 50 pixels. So even though it was an H1, I can control the size. In this case, I'm making it bigger. So it's a little more prominent, easier to read. Now I'm going to add some text shadowing. Text shadowing will set off the red text a little bit better. So text shadow, and then you're basically in control of like how far it shadows in multiple directions and how crisp or blurry it is and what color it is. So 2 pixels, 3 pixels, 2 pixels, and now a color. And the color is going to be white. So what we see is that shadowing, which is kind of helpful to have it set apart from the blue. So a few more minor settings here. I want to move it down. You can see that it's kind of stuck up at the top there. And we'll do that with a padding top of 80 pixels. So padding top of 80 pixels. Sounds like a lot, but you can see that just basically shifts the text downward. So padding on top means there's some spacing here, and that pushes the text down. All right, lastly, I don't want it at the left edge, so I'm going to indent it, just like you might in a word processor. There's a property called text indent, and we will text indent it 20 pixels. So text indent 20 pixels. No spaces, by the way, between the number and the px for pixels. You can really use other measurements other than pixels as well, but when we're dealing with image-based designs here, it does make sense because images have specific settings for height and width typically, so that makes sense to work with them in the same measurements. Okay, so I think we've achieved a much more readable heading to go along with our header background image, and we're now in a better position to go forward with styling of the main other portions of the page. Now let's make sure our other pages have similar appearance. Boards page and contact page. So you can see that work in the header area is remaining consistent. One thing you may have noticed is that we have this empty space up here at the top. It's a little strange, but I think we're going to have to try to fix it with an unusual setting. And it's going to go in the H1 area with a margin top of 1 pixel, which sounds strange, but let's try it. Now, look what happened. I say I want a margin top of 1 pixel, and it forces it to move the whole header area up there. A little quirky, but it served our purpose. So next, we're going to move into this area of controlling the two columns, left and right. Remember, the left-hand column is for the navigation area, the right-hand column is for the main content. With that in mind, let's go back to our editor, and we're going to come down below the H1s, and we're going to focus on the navigation, the nav. Remember seeing the nav, which surrounds our links. So using that same tag name here as our selector, we can focus attention on it, and we're going to set a width of 200 pixels for that navigation area. This is going to allow us to define that left-hand column as being 200 pixels. We're going to use a property now called float. Float is an interesting property. It allows you to take something and move it left or right. Float you might think of as going up or down, but actually the object you're floating just goes left or right. What it does though is it allows other things in the HTML below it to float up next to it. So let's take a look at what our page is doing now. Okay, you can see that our navigation is now acting as a left column, and we have some stuff floating up to its right. Not exactly the result we were hoping for, because our content is still all over here, but we're on our way. We have some evidence that things are beginning to work. I want to set a margin top for the nav also while we're here to move it down. Margin top is going to be 50 pixels. So that should move our navigation starting point down a little bit, and we can see that does. And brackets is showing us that's 50 pixel space that we just created. And next, I also now want to take the main area and I want to give it a left-hand padding. Actually, we're creating this space here to move this out of the way. So we'll have a left-hand navigation area and our content on the right. So let's move to that right below nav. First of all, let's take a look and remind ourselves of what these HTML tags look like. So there's the nav area, and what's right below it? A section. This is the main section for the whole page content. And because you could normally have multiple sections on a page, that's why I went ahead and set this ID to main. So now we're going to target this main section, and we're going to give it that padding on its left to move it out of the way, so it's not sitting here underneath the nav. Okay, so back to our styles sheet, and we're going to do that targeting with a hashtag main, no spaces in there. Now that as a selector means hashtag basically means ID. So we're saying anything that has an ID of main is going to get this formatting. Now there can only be one thing in your page that has that ID in it, and in this case it is the section. So what are we going to do with it? Padding on the left to keep it away from the nav area, and we're going to match the width of the nav with 200 pixels. Let's see what that does. Aha! Now you can see that we've successfully moved that whole main section, and that should be true of our other pages. Yep. Now the boards is a mess for other reasons, but that's just the content area we can work with later. So you can see that we are getting the consistent separation of navigation and content into two columns. Now we have definitely work to do on the navigation area to get the look that we were after with the skateboard backgrounds and the navigation links to be vertically placed in here. But we're slowly but surely moving forward towards that goal. Alright, so next we're going to work with that navigation. Our links in there are what kind of tags? The links in the navigation area are, guess what, A tags, right? You certainly learned that previously. Links are A tags. So now if we're in our style sheet and we want our links to look a certain way, you shouldn't be surprised that our selector is going to be an A. Now, in order for us to turn horizontal links into vertical links, we're going to have to set some properties like width and height. So the width is going to be 200 pixels. We're saying each link is going to be 200 pixels wide, which should fit into that left-hand nav column nicely. We're also going to set a height for these links, and that height will be 60 pixels. Now, where do I get these numbers from? Well, I'm thinking about the little skateboard background that these links are going to have, and I'm trying to set up something that will work with that. Now let's go ahead and set the background image in there. The background image is going to be done with a background property. And background is going to have a URL, and we're going to have to find bg links. So that's the background for the links. We have other properties to set here. Well, let's set a couple more settings and we'll keep our eye on what's going on with those links. I'm going to float them to the left. That's going to allow them to kind of stack on top of one another. There you go. Now we can really see what's going on. So when you float left, there's not enough space for them to float next to each other, so they float down like that. Now you see these big boards coming in behind them. The actual size of the board is bigger than the space, so we're seeing part of that. Now, what about this other link? I mean, these are part of the navigation. This makes sense that we have some pretty exotic formatting here, but this is just a link right in the middle of our text. Do we really want that to take on this same look? Answer is no, we don't. And that has to do with the way we set up the selector. Let's solve the problem of how those links are looking, and then we'll take care of that fourth link that looks like it's getting styled and it shouldn't be. So next I'm going to say background size. So let's set background size. Remember, that helps to match the background image size to the actual space we're working with. And so in this case, the background size we want is very specific, 150 pixels width and 45 pixels height, which should better match what we're dealing with here. And let's go take a look. Okay, now what do we see? A better sized board, but we're seeing repetition of the board, both vertically and horizontally. So we need to fix that too. Let's go back up to the background property. We can set a couple more properties in there. One is called no repeat, and that should really help. And then also center. We want that background centered. No semicolons in there. This is all one big long property. Now let's see. Better, yes? Definitely. We now have the background image we want. We're just not getting the text to go in the right spot. So we're making progress, but we're not there yet. So continuing, we need to set text align center. That will help to move the link text into the background image a little bit better. Not bad, not bad, but now we need to center align it more vertically. Okay, line height will help us there. Let's try line height of 60. That will force our text in the middle of that. So line height, 60 pixels. There we go. So the text will go in the middle of that line height. We set the line height to be the same as the height of the link itself. So now we're getting pretty close to the look we wanted. But now how about this link here? This was just a link in the middle of our text. Do we want a skateboard behind it? No, it just totally disrupts the flow of the content there. So what we really wanted to target with our A selector was the links inside the navigation only, not anywhere. So in order to say that, we need to use this selector nav space A. What that says is let's style the A tags only if they're inside the nav. So you do that with a space between two separate items. I am not formatting the nav, I am formatting the A, but I am formatting the A only when it appears inside the nav. So that should help us target the right links. You can see this is no longer being formatted, which is great. We want to target navigation links separate from regular links. So there you go. Now what happens when you mouse over these links? Not too much, right? Pretty boring. So do we need these underlinings here, by the way? Probably not. Now that we have this styling of the skateboards, it's pretty clear that those are links and we don't need the underlining there. Whereas we do need it here in the middle of this text so it stands out. So we can add yet another property to our nav A, which would be text decoration. And we can set text decoration to none. And that will remove the underlining. As you can see, again, it doesn't touch this underlining, just this underlining. So there we go. We're getting closer and closer to what we were trying to do with that navigation. And one other setting I did want to make was to have them colored blue. So color blue. And now you can see it kind of matches this background on the heading a little bit more nicely. Now, when I mouse over, I want to see some reaction. I want to see some difference. I'm going to pick up the red color when I mouse over. And we'll do that with a separate style setting. So let's create a new selector. It's going to be just links in the nav when hovered. So that is a special kind of selector. It's called a pseudo class. It says only links inside the nav when hovered. So what are we going to do? Change the color to red. So when we mouse over navigation links, we should see them turn red. Red, red, red. How about this guy? No, we're not formatting it because it's not inside nav. So there you go. Navigation bar has been styled now, and of course it's functional, right? It's going to take me to those pages. Now we are getting closer and closer to our goals, but we still have some work to do. One thing we have work to do on is this boards page. It's still a mess. And another thing on all our pages is the copyright. The copyright's way over on the left-hand side, so it didn't get a chance to be styled at all, and it's still sitting over there. I also think it kind of gets in the way of the regular text. We're going to style that footer to kind of de-emphasize it. And those styles are a lot easier to do than some of the other styles on the board. So let's take a look at that. So I'm just going to go footer, because remember we do have a footer tag. And let's set some of those de-emphasizing properties. First of all, text align center. And next, we want to set a color that will help to kind of set that off. De-emphasizing it, I'm going to use a gray. Considering the rest of the text is black on a light gray background, so it's going to blend in a little bit more, not stand out like the rest of the text. And then lastly, I'm going to use a margin top. Now the idea of a margin top here is to create more distance away from the regular text that it's connecting to. And we'll set it to 35 pixels away. So now what we're going to get is this 35 pixel spacing there. And you can see the gray text is a little less contrast. So let's go to the other pages and check it out. There it is. There it is. So we accomplished the goal of de-emphasizing the footer text. We did it by aligning it to center, creating more space separation, and blending it into the background a little bit more. After all, it's just a copyright and it doesn't need to be standing out much. So those footer changes were made. And now I think it's time for us to take a look at the contact page. We have some fun things we can do over there. The contact page is unique in that it has these bulleted lists, these unordered lists. And we're going to jazz those up because those are pretty boring looking bullets. I think you'd agree. So back to the editor to work with those. We're actually going to put this selector above the footer. Since the footer is the last part of the page, we're not going to put anything below it. UL is the tag for an unordered or bulleted list, so that's what we're styling here. And we have a nice property called list style image. And that property allows us to name an existing image to go in for the bullets. It's that simple, and I happen to have one all ready for us, and that's called skateboard bullet. There we go. Let's add the semicolon at the end, and let's take a look at it. It's not going to work quite right at first, but we'll make a change. So you can see those bullets are now replaced with little skateboards. Now you have to be careful when you're doing a bullet image that that image is small, especially vertically. Otherwise, it's going to disrupt the line spacing. This is kind of too big horizontally, but it's okay vertically. A bullet list is supposed to be indenting, and this is kind of like outdenting here because that skateboard is just too long. So what I need to do is to adjust it further with a margin. So I'm going to add a second property, and we're going to do a margin left. Margin left will move the skateboard and the text to the right. And we're going to use about 35 pixels. Knowing the size of that little skateboard image helps. And you can see as a result, we're getting now the typical indentation on those. Now, I wouldn't recommend this for every type of site, but this is a skateboard site. We can have a little fun with our bullets. Now, we don't really have bullets elsewhere, so we're not seeing them. But if we do add later a bulleted list, it'll pop in there from that UL formatting. All right, it's time for us to pay some attention now to the boards page and the content there. So back and before we start to do some formatting there, we need to take a look at that boards page. It's got some special kinds of HTML here. Now, inside the main section, under the H2 for boards, we have article. You may or may not have seen articles before. They're basically subsections. So we have two different boards that are featured here, and they are both in their own article. With that in mind, we have headings and paragraphs inside the article. Nothing out of the ordinary. But here's where we want to make sure we're aware that inside the H3 for each article, that's where the image containing the board is. And you can see when you mouse over, the brackets shows you what that image looks like. So those are our two big product images, and they are actually part of an IMG tag that is embedded into the H3. Alright, now notice also that they're given a class of product pick. A class is similar to an ID, except you can use it in multiple places. So both of the images have this same shared class name of product pick that allows me to use CSS to style them together as one, assuming you want similar styling to go out to both. So back to the style sheet, and we do. And I'm going to put these now underneath the UL. We can do a dot product pick, that's one word. We're going to float those. We're going to float those to the right. You can already see the effect there as we begin to format those out to the right. We're also going to want to set a margin left, but let's hold off on that. Let's see the result of just floating. What a difference that makes, just floating those out to the right, kind of getting them away from the text and away from the navigation area and letting them line up against that right edge. Remember, this is our 20% right margin for the page. It's going right up against that. That doesn't look bad at all, but you might notice that some of our text is getting a little close to it, and so we can back that off with a left margin on those images, and that will really help. So let's go back. So let's add that margin left in there, and we're going to set that margin left to 30 pixels. And let's see the result of that. You can see our text has been pushed away and create some nice spacing there between the image and the text. So we get a better wrapping of the text to the left of that skateboard image. All right, very nice. So how close are we now to the final result we wanted? Well, we're awfully close. For example, we haven't really done anything with the headings. We haven't really done much of anything with the fonts. So typically you would, and if we want to do really quick on the fonts, let's address that because that's kind of an important thing to do. I'm going to go to the body and I'm going to set font family here. Font family, real simple, sans serif. Sans serif means a font that does not have any decorative edges. That's what I'm going to set to the whole page. So now when you look at the site, wow, different look to this. More readable actually in the detail area, but kind of boring in the headings, which are much larger and could stand to be a little bit more decorative and still be quite readable. So what are we going to do? We're going to create a combo style here for the headings. H1, comma H2, comma H3. And we don't have anything beyond H3, so we'll just stop there. And I want to set another font family, and this time I'm going to set it to be something a little more exotic. I want a serif font, but I'm going to show you a font list. We'll say Georgia, Times, and serif. Serif has decorative edges to the lettering. Georgia, Times are both serif fonts. So what you're saying to the browser is, if Georgia exists, use it. If not, move on down to my next favorite, Times. If that doesn't exist, then just pick your default serif. Anyway, you get something with a little decorative look to it. And you can see, what's it affecting? My H1s, my H2s, my H3s. And that's true of all pages. I still get my default sans serif look in the detail of the text of these pages. So you can now see the benefit of setting something in the body that affects everything and then coming into the places where you want to override that, such as the headings. All right, well, that pretty much concludes the various settings we wanted to give to our pages. You can see the value of having a centralized style sheet file to control an entire website's styles. And I would say one thing you would also want to keep in mind here is that we probably want to validate. So you can bring in some more extensions that are good for controlling CSS. Even Beautify, though, will help you make a nicer looking style sheet. So I would appreciate you using Beautify on not only your HTML but also your CSS. But then there's also the ability to validate. So we can copy and paste this text into, for example, the W3C's CSS validator. And there are other tools as well. You can grab other extensions that'll do more with CSS as well. But I think you get a pretty good feel for what CSS can do. And, you know, it's a complicated process, to be honest with you. You're not probably going to pick it up right away and feel comfortable with it. It takes some practice. And of course we have a whole class at RCC for styling, 72B, where we more systematically break it down. But here at least you get a feel for what it can do and its power. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you learned some things, and we'll see you in the next video.